entrepreneurs, are you trying to make bigger profits in your small business? Like many of us, I'm sure you're feeling it. Business is hard, and now more than ever, you need to have a plan to help your business not just survive, but thrive. And it can happen as simply with thinking with the end in mind. I'm Marcia Reiner. I'm a business growth strategist. I've helped tons of small business owners to establish and implement a tangible plan that guarantees increased profitability, guides your growth, and plans for your future exit. Because a business worth selling is also a business worth owning. And I want to share strategies that I've earned and learned with you on today's Profit with a Plan podcast. But before we get started, I have something to share with you. I put together an insightful Think Outside the Box live masterclass. This is a 15-minute training specifically designed to help you learn how to get your business sale ready. Even if you aren't thinking of selling it. Why now? Join me and find out all the benefits that come with having a sale-ready business. Register for free at scale2sell.biz. All right, I'm excited to have my guest on with me today, Sean Campbell. Sean has been training, mentoring, and educating all his life. An exceptionally well-regarded conference speaker and author, Sean has delivered talks for Fortune 50 companies and top-tier conferences. He has also been the author of several books on technical as well as business topics. Sean is a professional service firm owner and has been for over 20 years. His professional service work has spanned consulting engagements with Fortune 50s and startups that you've heard of, and the sale of his first professional service firm, and the growth of delivery, sales, marketing, and operational practices inside of professional service firms. Speaking our language, folks. In short, Sean brings the wealth of knowledge when it comes to surviving and thriving as a professional service firm owner and a leader of practice area inside of larger service firms. Sean, I'm really excited to have you on Profit with a Plan. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Okay, so a lot of us have challenges when we're working with our business, and I'm interested to know why you kind of chose the angle of researching and getting into that space. Tell us how you got there.
Yeah, well, oddly enough, I wanted to be a college professor, and so I think there's some overlap there. But there's a story about a girl that stopped that progression. But anyway, so same girl I'm married to, so like all's well that ends well in that regard. And, but yeah, basically we ended up doing research as kind of our primary focus area, in large part because we felt we really understood the industry we were in, and we gained a bit of a perspective on it. And at the same time, I think there's always been an interest, at least for me and for my business partner as well, in terms of getting the opportunity to learn deeply about an industry and businesses and their problems, right? I mean, one of the reasons I enjoy what I do is the moment when I'm really trying to understand what the business is trying to achieve, what their challenges are, what they have gotten stuck in to some degree, and how we can help them figure that out. And to a large extent, a market research firm is a truth teller, at least a good one should be. We exist sometimes, I tell people, to tell the truth to as many people as the client's comfortable with. And obviously that means inside their company, because to a large extent, when you buy market research, although there are exceptions like thought leadership research and whatever, but to a large extent, when you buy it, you're getting it so that you have some kind of strategic or tactical advantage that then you can leverage over a period of months or years, right? So it's also one of the funny things about what we do, in that we don't always get to herald in the same way the impact we've had, because by definition, our impacts are somewhat non-disclosable in a way. And so, that's an interesting side point for marketing. And there's other businesses like ours, like attorneys have the same problem. You can only say so much about your client's problems publicly, because somewhat by definition, the act of solving them is confidential. But that leads to some really interesting things we get to solve. And I don't know if you want to spend time on kind of the entrepreneur journey that led to a business doing this. I can tap that too. But motivation wise, those are some of the reasons I ended up owning a business that focuses predominantly on research.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because that is an area that so many business owners really don't know what to do with. There's the marketing guy that comes in and says, okay, so tell me about your ideal client. Or they're coming in and saying, just duplicate your favorite client. But there's so many of us that are out there that have really just our own view of it and not the real data that we need and understand. And I'd love to find out exactly what that data is that we should be looking for to be able to effectively grow our business and bring in the clients that we want to bring in, right? Isn't that our goal?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first point's perhaps the most important one, right? Is that business owners, if we just focus on business owners, but we could talk about C-levels or vice presidents or, team leaders or whatever. The first thing to recognize, and we think about this all the time when we do market research, is that the individuals we're working for, they have valuable sources of information available to them. It's not likely that anybody who's in a senior role is flying completely blind. And so the real issue there is what's additive, where's the gap? And I think sometimes, to put it bluntly, if somebody's been in role long enough, they've kind of ceased to see the gaps, right? They feel a great deal of confidence about their view of the market, about their customers, about the competition. And usually that's only shaken when they run into some form of pain. And it's one of the main reasons we get hired. I say we get hired for pain or opportunity, and pain drives a fair amount of it. And I think the reason for that is that, frankly, it's a lot easier to pay for research to remove pain than it is to make kind of a bet you're making 2x better, right? On the opportunity side. And so, but a lot of that pain originates from failing to recognize that your view of the market might have atrophied, right? Just because as a vice president of sales, you did sales calls 10 years ago, and so you understand the company's customers, doesn't really mean you viscerally understand them right now.
Right.
And so that's that air gap that happens when you're no longer engaging with the market directly and your people can sometimes be one of the major reasons people need to even embark on research to begin with. And then, the kind of data people look for, I think a lot of times, is, either a mix of qualitative or quantitative data. I would honestly say that sometimes people index a little too much on the quantitative data. If you just threw a rock and hit somebody that owned a business and said, what do you want to buy for market research? And they, if you had to do it tomorrow, they'd say, I'd like a quantitative survey, and I can tell you that honestly, that's not really always the best thing to go do. It has a lot to do with what the problems you face. And I think the reason people jump to that is that, frankly, when they think of research, they think of filling out surveys, because in their private life, when you're on a call with Verizon for an hour, which could have been 10 minutes, but it's an hour, and they say, would you like to fill out this survey? And you're like, no, I'm going to hang up right now. But you end up having what feels like a fairly robotic interaction. And that's not the work we do. I mean, when you work with a business and you're trying to solve kind of business problems with research, it's a pretty investigative effort. And there's a lot that goes into that, which means, there's not necessarily one research method that you're going to go focus on. So I would sum that up by saying, I think when you need research is when hopefully you can recognize all on your own that your knowledge of the market or prospects or customers or competitors has atrophied to the point that it's dangerous. And secondly, when you do step out to think about that, recognize that there's a variety of different types of research you can do that all line up with different kinds of business problems. And you want to be smart about which research method you pick and what approach.
And the results that you're looking to achieve, right? So right. I like that there are many ideas beyond the survey, because yes, we've all had that survey and went, Oh my gosh. Or you're so quick to respond that it's really not juicy information that you're providing. But at the same time, asking your existing customers or your ideal customers or the market you want to go into, asking them detailed questions about what their problem is and how that they would like to have it solved and what kind of expectations they're having or they have and they're interested in. These are things that the owner can't do or really shouldn't be doing, right? And that's where a company like yours comes in. What kind of expectation should we have in these surveys? Are they taking a long time? Are they quick? What kind of programs do you offer?
Yeah, one thing just to tap back on something you said. I mean, I think the question about can you do your own research is always an interesting one. Just briefly, I mean the answer really is you can. Just can you be distanced enough from the outcome that it's viable? I mean, yes, you are going to bias things to some degree, right? You know, you're going to go talk to your own customers, and you might have to really lean into them pretty hard to get them to admit that your company's making mistakes if they really like you in general. But it is possible, right? I mean, it is possible, but you are going to definitely get a lot more just kind of cleaner, straightforward stuff that's going to come to you if you have an outside firm do it. Much less they can operate at scale and things like that. So I think a lot of it has to do with you not jumping to confirmation bias the minute somebody says, you know, hey, this XYZ has happened. The classic example there is sales, right? You know, sales is fascinating to me from a research standpoint because your sales leader, in a way, I feel usually is hurting themselves when they walk into kind of a meeting with you as maybe the owner, because everyone has met a salesperson whose entire world and all of their strategic decisions seem to revolve around the last customer they talked to. You know, so, you know, and in research, we'd call that an N of one, right? Or you might say, don't generalize from a specific. But the funny thing about sales is when you can coach a sales leader to say, hey, let's not focus on what happened just before the meeting. Can you really extrapolate for me how and what you've seen over this quarter's worth of interactions? Because the flip side is sales is kind of having a never-ending qualitative research study with the market. And if you can get even a few of your sales team members to kind of think about their job that way, they can be an incredible source of intelligence. And that might require a bit of coaching to get them to really see the trends that are happening with them. And there's ways to make that more programmatic too. You know, there's win-loss studies and all kinds of things like that. But there's definitely a way to use your company as kind of a sensor. But like I said, the problem really is that usually leadership doesn't recognize there's a problem until it's too late. And at that point, there's not a culture of using the company as kind of a sensor to what's going on in the market. And then, yeah, at that point, you're just much better off leaving it to the professionals per sense and saying, let's just let them go do it. As far as
is that really the best use of your time as well to be doing the research or many other priorities that need to be taken care of by the leader?
Yeah. And that's like a whole different podcast in a way of like, when do you know as a leader to quit doing things? And that is which should seem to be a very simple thing, but for many business owners, it's not. And it's a mix of trust and enablement and training and apprenticeship and hiring the right people. And I would say, and if you were to sum it up, and then we'll get back to like what's a quant survey look like, is it really comes down to not being threatened by hiring people who are way smarter than you in the domain. If you summarize the easiest way to answer that problem, it's if you can identify somebody that can do the books better than you, hallelujah. If you can identify someone who can do sales better than you, hallelujah. If you can identify someone who can maybe even talk to customers better than you, just because you started the thing doesn't mean you're the best person on the planet for engaging with customers. But that's hard to do because owning a business is a ego creation and ego deflation exercise in the best of time. And so it's difficult for owners to sometimes put away the helium tank and like say, I'm just going to invest in somebody else. Yeah. And anyway, so back to quant surveys though, really quick. Your average quant survey, if you engage in it in a business standpoint, you're going to be sitting there looking at the screen, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. You might answer like a good, 10 to 20 questions. There are surveys that run longer, but they usually experience a degree of fatigue. And then you have an issue of, sure, maybe some people made it all the way through the survey, but then other people fell off before they finished it. And then you've got to pay to replace that participant. So there's issues there. But yeah, I mean, that's basically how it works. And a lot of them are delivered online. Back in the day, somebody would have take you through it with a clipboard or whatever. Sometimes you'll end up having somebody walk you through it over the phone. But more often than not these days, you get a link to it in email and then you go fill it out. And that's a pretty typical survey. But like I said, that's only one canonical research method for B2B.
Awesome. So there are many ways that we can gather this information, right? Beyond just asking the client to fill out a survey. What other kind of methods could we use or could be used to gather the research for, say, experiencing or investigating a new market or a new product or something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, when you're going into a new market, that's definitely kind of a place more for qualitative research, which most people are not very familiar with.
Okay. So define then.
Yeah, so qualitative research is, if you were to sum it up in a non-academic sense, it's one person talking to another person, and that instantly is different than a web survey or some kind of thing that you're going to go fill out on your own. The most canonical example of that is what's called an in-depth interview, sometimes shorted to just IDI in the lingo. And that's usually someone interviewing someone for 30 to 60 minutes, somewhat analogous to what we're doing here. And, you've got a discussion guide that someone's walking through on the research side, and that's aligned with key business problems, key questions that somebody needs to answer, for like new market entry or things like that. Another example is a focus group. Some people might have a little more familiarity with that. They've either seen it on TV or they understand kind of what it is. It's more often than not done virtually. The mental image of it is a bunch of people around kind of a generic conference room table sitting in a, room with a one-way mirror kind of thing.
With a glass window.
Yeah. And that's still done, but in business to business, because the people you're trying to reach are so hard to get and their time is so valuable, just a brief note here, like the incentives that you might pay to get a senior decision maker, like a vice president or a C-level for a technology purchase, you might pay them $200-300 just for their hour of time. And if you try to extrapolate that and say, well, okay, now I want to get 8 senior executives to somehow all show up in Toledo into my nondescript focus group room so they can have 1 hour old Starbucks. No one is coming to go do that. Right. And then there's another issue with focus groups that can play in, which is that, people are talking about a sensitive business topic and they're not entirely sure who else you have in the room with them. So, there's a question of, can I really disclose the challenges my company is facing with a given product or service? Because is that advantageous perhaps to somebody else in the room? Whereas if you're doing in-depth interviews and everybody's anonymized, you don't really have that issue. So in-depths are kind of a classic thing. And if someone's listening thinking, I would never spend an hour on the phone with a researcher, I would say you would be surprised. And the simple reason is, and I've said this for years because it's always true, is if you tell someone they're smart, they will give you a half hour of their time pretty freely. And
is that how I get all my guests on my show?
I was going to say the entire podcast industry is to some extent based on this premise. Now there's more to it than that. There are gives and gets for host and interviewee in podcasts. There are also gives and gets in the market research industry. For example, usually even outside of the incentive, there's this issue of like, I get to learn about the market and hopefully affect the market by what I'm sharing. So you do have a little bit of a bi-directional thing that's going on there. And the incentive, in a weird way, it's funny because people might go, it's all about the incentive. And I'd be like, it's not really, because if you were to do outreach for this, like we do, and you were to say, like, can you participate in the survey? We'd like to schedule an hour interview, What you'll find is that there's kind of this like flattening of the curve with incentives. Like you would think like, okay, if I really need my study done in a hurry, I'm going to pay everybody $1,000 for their hour and they're all going to show up magically. And what you find is the curve flattens because yes, they need to be paid because, well, they kind of understand implicitly or explicitly what their kind of hourly rate is in life, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you go talk to a surgeon, they're just not going to give you the time of day for $5, right? In the medical field, they might do incentives of $400 or $500 if they're trying to get some like specialized cancer surgeon to show up for an interview, right? So think of it a little bit more like an honorarium in a way, right? They need to recognize that they're being recognized for their expertise, but you can't just throw money at it. At that point, it becomes a lot more about the outreach. And the thing in the outreach that always tends to make it happen is you, this individual, basically have this degree of expertise, and we recognize that, and we would like you to share that in this forum to affect these things. Without that, you could throw money at the problem all day. And so that just takes you back to, at the end of the day, people need to feel like they're going to share something valuable and that it's going to be recognized.
A little bit of status there. Yeah.
Yeah. And people are only so mercenary with their time at the end of the day, right? I mean, if you go to somebody and say, hey, there's this company in market and they really want to improve their products, and you buy products from that slice of the market, there is some degree of motivation just to participate. And then I would say the final thing in that is that you have to be able to have a meaningful conversation when you get on. It's one of the things that's different with in-depths and quant surveys. A quant survey, you can sit there and basically find yourself in a scenario where you've designed the survey instrument in advance. You've had a lot of meetings about it. You've basically had a lot of discussion about it in advance, and then you can kind of prepare for that and make that all work.
Dude, are we getting the hook? Is that what the ding is for?
Yeah. No. It's funny. Yeah. Like I have a pretty big monitor for those on video. So I'm like looking over at this stream of text messages I'm getting, but nobody's dying. So we're all good. I'll get back to it eventually. And anyway, what I was going to say is that the quant survey requires a lot more upfront work, whereas the in-depth interview requires you to spend a lot of time having a meaningful interaction. So if you're thinking about hiring somebody to do qualitative work, it's really, really important that they know your industry and your lane. For example, we don't do anything with medical. You get me on with a surgeon, I don't know anything about surgeons. I mean, I like some people that you've been under the knife a couple times in your life, but you weren't even awake for that. So what do you know about surgeons, right? And so like, you don't know anything. On the other hand, you put us in contact with a high-tech company that sells cloud software, hardware. We understand all that dynamic, right? We can talk to their customers in a really meaningful way. So, so that's some of what kind of when you think about the balance and the level of investment and the approaches, qual or quant, that's something to think about too.
Okay, so let's kind of pull this full circle here and talk about the value of the research. So what does the owner or the end user of this research expect to get out of it, and how could they use this kind of research to further their business?
Well, I
know it's kind of big picture, but
yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that you get usually is tactics and strategies of how to improve like sales, marketing, and product. If you were to break it down, and so. At the end of the day, we've filled in that gap between what you knew about the market and where the market's really at. And that can be incredibly advantageous. So, we might provide sales tactics that you're going to undertake. We might provide new sales strategies. We might provide new marketing campaigns and tactics. And we might even tell you that, there's certain features and capabilities that you really need to invest in on the product standpoint. So, there's just a lot of huge benefit you can get, when you've brought in somebody who can really understand your business and can kind of come up with meaningful recommendations that can move it forward.
I love it. And it's so important because, We only know, like you said in the beginning, if we're so busy in the business, we can't see the forest through the trees, and we lose connection
Correct.
with the market out there because we're like, just go, go, go. And to have a company such as yours to come in and find out really what they're looking for, whether it's like they don't like pink, they like orange, or they want the switch to work better, or they need it to be in this platform or in this method. You're not going to get that by asking your customers that are already happy with you or like you and are going to give you the wrong answers potentially. So having that independent third party that can go out and do it, on top of the fact that you're so busy in your business, you probably shouldn't be going out asking questions and doing surveys and getting into the details, because that's not your lane, right? Your lane is running and leading the company. So really important stuff. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. I know that so many business owners miss this part. They really do. They miss it, especially in the small space. In the bigger space, yeah, they've got enough budget to pay for it. But in the small space, they're missing this. And so it's super valuable to be able to bring this attention to it and showcase it. So, Sean, where can listeners find out more about you and how they could possibly get involved with the research that they need?
Yeah. If folks want to hear more about research, or if you just want to have a sense of the kinds of questions you should ask a research vendor, even if you're not targeting kind of our lane, like high tech, you can just look us up at cascadeinsights.com. And my email is just Sean, SEAN at cascadeinsights.com. And you can find that we're blogging about this stuff regularly. There's all kinds of stuff on the website about it. And always happy to educate folks just on, how to be a good consumer of research too. Again, even if you're not a potential target, just happy to educate. But overall, like I said,
Whoop, you're freezing a little bit on me here towards the end. So hopefully we'll bring you back on. Whoop, are you with me here?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, you froze a little bit on the end. So it's nice that you offer this kind of information. I appreciate the fact that you're blogging. And I think that business owners really need to look at that angle and look at some opportunities where they can, as you said in the beginning, jump ahead, right? And be ahead of that market curve and be able to gain maybe a little bit more knowledge base so they can grow their company. So awesome. All right, listeners, I hope you found an idea or two to put into your business that will help you be more profitable. I know that market research is really important for understanding your delivery, your marketing, and your sales, as Sean had mentioned. So definitely you should be thinking about it. So don't forget, now more than ever, you want to build your business like you want to sell it. Don't forget to register for my new 15-minute training on how to get your business sale ready, even if you aren't thinking of selling it yet. Why? Because there's tons of benefits that come with a sale ready business. Go register for free at scale2sell.biz. You don't want to miss this class. And as always, Sean and I would love to hear your questions. Give us some questions that you've had in surveys, or maybe something that you're really interested in understanding in your market. And Sean and I will respond back with answering your questions. Don't forget to subscribe and comment on today's show. And as always, you can catch Profit with a Plan on any of your favorite podcast players. And we're looking forward to more great profitable information on next week's show. So until then, make your plans and profit with them. Thanks so much, Sean.
Thanks for having me on.